Hello, my name is Justin Whitcomb, and I just want to thank you. Hello, my name is Justin Whitcomb, and I am the lead pastor of Veritas Bible Church in Warren, Michigan. And I want to thank you for continuing along with us in our video series on biblical theology. We are currently in the epoch of prophetic divine revelation, and in today's video, we are going to discuss the history of prophetism. So, in the previous video, we talked about how a prophet is uh, created or conceived, what is the purpose of a prophet, and now in this video, we're going to discuss the history of prophetism. So let's begin by discussing the history. In some aspects, we gave partial examination to the history of prophetism when discussing the conceptualization of a prophet. However, we're going to go further with this conversation to see the meaningful progression of the role. First, we see in the origins of prophetism, rooted in the Mosaic epoch, the revealing of the primary underlying value of the prophets. What is revealed during this epoch, primarily seen in the time of Moses, is there is a primarily religious value alongside a functional value found in the office. Numbers 11:26 to 29 says, "Now two men remained in the camp, one named Eldad and the other named Medad, and the Spirit rested on them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent, and so they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua the son of Nun, the assistant of Moses from his youth, said, My lord Moses, stop them. But Moses said to him, Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his spirit on them. And so by saying this, it is evident that the main intention is for the people to imitate the prophets. And so yes, there's that functional role that prophets have within the society, but ultimately the religious value is that the nation would follow the example of the prophets. Dr. Geerhardus Vos notes, it was an honor for them to have prophets. It was an even greater honor for the people to become like prophets. In the last video, we noted the first major period of prophetism takes place from Samuel up to what is referred to as the writing prophets in the middle of the 8th century BC. However, we want to note some particulars concerning prophetism in the shift from the Mosaic epoch, in which the roots are established, to the prophetic epoch beginning with Samuel. The first thing to note is that the office expands publicly, as it is now set against the backdrop of the theocratic rule of earthly kings in Israel. This is an evident shift, as there were no earthly kings in Israel prior to. However, there's another development to note. In this epoch, we see a rise in the number of prophets, particularly when we count the men associated with Samuel. As we consider these, we have to make a distinction that we prefaced in the last video, and that is the prophetic office did not hinge upon the monarchy. We observed in the last video the tight-knit relationship between kings and prophets. However, this is not a new variant that as if the prophet would depend upon the king. In fact, it is more normative to see the opposite, that the kings depend upon the prophets. With all things considered, the relationship between the prophets and the kings was friendly, fostering, and protective. As a shift takes place into the second period of prophetism within this prophetic epoch, there is a rise in apostasy within not only Israel, uh, primarily seen in the monarch, and so we see that as a result, there is a strained relationship between the monarchy and the prophets. In fact, to say strained is underplaying the situation a bit. The reality is that the prophets were viewed as traitors. Additionally, within this mire of sin and struggle, the prophetic office does not come out unscathed. Micah 3:11 says, "Its heads give judgment for a bribe, its priests teach for a price, its prophets practice divination for money. Yet they lean on the Lord and say, is not the Lord in the midst of us? No disaster shall come upon us." This word given by the prophet Micah gives us a clear and brief example of this progression. In the midst of Israel arose false prophets that sought to use their office, as well as paganism, to receive wealth. This gives clear evidence that there was a great need for distinguishing between the false prophets and the true prophets. 1 Kings 18:3-4 says, "And Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, and when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by fifties in a cave and fed them with bread and water." This narrative we see in this chapter of 1 Kings provides a great summary of all that is taking place during this time. Again, there is this growing contention against the true prophets. False prophets are finding great abundance in the midst of a corrupt monarchy. And so in these two verses, we see the conflict between, again, the monarchy and the true prophets of Yahweh. Concluding this conversation of the history of prophetism within divine revelation, we see this in 1 Kings 18:17-19. The text says, "When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, 'Is it you, you troubler of Israel?' And he answered, 'I have not troubled Israel, but you have, in your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all of Israel to meet me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of the Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table.'" So again, this narrative continues within chapter 18, and we get further affirmation of these relationships by Ahab's address of Elijah. You see, he calls him the great troubler of Israel. He views true prophetism as a problem, as an enemy. But we also see that among these apostate monarchs, nearly 1,000 false prophets enjoy close fellowship with them. And so again, amongst the fallen monarchy, we see that false prophetism now at this point, as the prophetic office is coming to an end, is elevated. And so we see in this chapter, though, that it concludes with Yahweh vindicating the true prophets from among the false. And so I just want to thank you again for joining us for this series and for this video. In the next video, we will be discussing the different modes of prophetic revelation. And so I hope you will join us for that video. God bless.